Chapter 1. The Road into Silence. I used to think silence was the cure for everything. The city had worn me down. Screens, deadlines, the constant chatter of people who never seemed to stop talking. I wanted to disappear somewhere quiet, somewhere the air still smelled like pine and rain instead of exhaust fumes. So when I found an old online forum post about a stretch of untouched forest up north, a place you wouldn't find on any official map, I didn't hesitate. I packed my truck, cleared a week from my schedule, and drove straight into nowhere. The last gas station was 50 miles back. From there, the road narrowed into a single-lane trail that wound through hills and old timber. The deeper I went, the more the light changed. Less sun, more shadow, the kind of shade that feels alive. My GPS blinked out an hour before I reached the coordinates I'd marked, leaving only a static grey screen. I smiled. That was the point. When I finally parked, the forest swallowed the sound of the engine instantly. I stepped out and just stood there, breathing. Damp moss, cold earth, the faint sweetness of cedar. No voices, no phones, no hum of power lines. Just the wind sighing through trees so tall they seemed to hold up the clouds themselves. I loaded my pack, tightened the straps, and started walking. Each step carried me farther from the world I knew. Birds called overhead, unseen. Somewhere far off, a creek whispered through rocks. I followed that sound until I reached a small clearing ringed with ancient firs. Sunlight speared through the canopy, scattering across a narrow stream that glimmered like liquid glass. This would be my home for the week. I set up my tent near the creek. Nothing fancy, just a small dome of green nylon beside a circle of stones that would serve as my fire pit. The ground was soft but dry, blanketed in pine needles. I gathered wood, sparked a fire, and watched the smoke curl upward in lazy ribbons. For the first time in months, my shoulders unclenched. The forest wasn't just quiet, it was vast, heavy, aware. That sounds strange, but it's the only word that fits. The silence didn't feel empty, it felt full, like it was listening back. I cooked a simple meal, beans and rice from a tin, and sat by the fire until the light faded. When night fell, it did so completely, as if someone had pulled a curtain across the sky. The stars appeared one by one, sharp and cold. I leaned back against a fallen log, staring up through the branches, and felt small in a way that was almost comforting. I remember thinking how different the air sounded out here. No engines, no planes, just the low murmur of water and the occasional creak of wood settling in the wind. It was so still, so absolute, that even my breathing felt too loud. I told myself that was what I'd come for. The purity of isolation, the quiet that strips everything else away until it's just you and the wild. But there was something else beneath that peace, a faint tension in the stillness, like a held breath. I ignored it then, brushing it off as nerves. City brain, I thought, too used to noise to trust the quiet. When the fire burned low, I stirred the embers, zipped myself into my tent, and listened to the creek gurgling just a few feet away. The cold air carried the scent of wet soil and wood smoke. My eyelids grew heavy. Before sleep took me, I thought I heard something. Just a faint shift in the distance, a rustle too deep to be wind. But it stopped as soon as I noticed. The forest went still again. I smiled to myself and whispered, "Just the woods settling." That's what I believed then, before the silence learned my name. If stories like this keep you up at night, subscribe and turn on the bell, because what comes next is darker than you think. Chapter 2. The Clearing by the Creek. Morning came soft and silver. When I unzipped the tent, a pale mist hung over the clearing, drifting just above the creek like breath on glass. Everything was wet, the grass, the stones, even the air. I crouched by the water and splashed my face, the cold biting enough to wake me better than coffee ever could. The forest smelled clean, like rain and cedar sap. A raven croaked somewhere beyond the ridge. For a while, I just sat there, watching the current slide around smooth rocks, hypnotized by its rhythm. This was what I'd wanted, to feel small in a world that didn't care who I was. After breakfast, I followed the creek upstream with my camera and a small pack. The trail was faint, almost animal-made, winding between trunks that rose higher than any building I'd ever worked in. Shafts of light filtered down through fog, illuminating pockets of dust and pollen that looked like drifting stars. Every step took me deeper into silence until even my footfalls sounded foreign. I reached a fallen tree the size of a bus and climbed onto it. From up there, I could see my little clearing below, the tent like a green dot in a sea of moss. The stillness pressed against me, dense and watchful. Somewhere out there I thought must be 1,000 eyes, birds, deer, things unseen, but I couldn't spot a single movement. Back at camp, I built the fire higher to chase off the damp. The smoke climbed straight up, unbothered by wind. I cooked lunch, read a few pages from an old paperback, then let the book fall shut. My mind kept drifting, not to emails or projects, but to the strange perfection of the place. No trash, no footprints, but mine. It was as if the forest had been waiting, undisturbed, for someone foolish enough to walk in. By late afternoon, the temperature dropped. A light drizzle began to fall, turning the clearing into a mirror of wet leaves and reflection. I pulled my jacket tighter and watched the sky darken sooner than it should have. Twilight always comes faster in deep woods. Shadows blur together until you can't tell where one tree ends and the next begins. I fed another log to the fire and listened. The rain had stopped, but droplets still fell from the canopy in slow, irregular taps. Beyond that, nothing. No birds, no frogs, not even the creek for a moment, as if it too held its breath. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was aware. I told myself to stop overthinking, to enjoy the stillness I'd driven hundreds of miles to find, so I unpacked my small camping stove, boiled water, and made tea. The smell of smoke and pine needles mixed into something comforting, grounding. When I closed my eyes, the sound of the fire cracked softly, almost like whispering. Later, as night took over again, the mist returned, thicker this time, rolling low across the ground. The moon appeared behind the trees, a dull white coin half hidden by clouds. I felt that faint tension again, like invisible eyes flicking toward me from somewhere in the dark. It wasn't fear, not yet, just awareness, the sense of being quietly observed. I poked at the fire until sparks rose and faded. "You're alone," I muttered, half to convince myself. "That's all you wanted." The woods gave no answer. Only the faint sigh of wind moved through the branches. When I finally crawled into the tent, the air inside was cool and damp, smelling faintly of smoke and nylon. The creek murmured close by, steady and soft. I let its rhythm pull me towards sleep. Just before my thoughts slipped away, I heard it again, a single, sharp crack from somewhere beyond the clearing. Not thunder, not falling rain, wood snapping under heavy weight. I waited for a second sound that never came. Then silence, thicker than before, settled around the tent. My heart beat faster, but I forced a breath and whispered, "It's nothing, just the forest shifting." Still, I kept listening long after the fire died to embers, until every sound blurred into the hush of mist and running water. That's how the second night began. Too still, too quiet, like the forest was holding back a secret it wasn't ready to share. Chapter 3: The Sound That Shouldn't Exist. I don't remember falling asleep that night. One moment I was listening to the creak through the tent fabric, and the next I was waking to a sound that didn't belong. It was sharp, sudden, a single, echoing crack that sliced through the dark. My eyes snapped open. For a few seconds, I just lay there, trying to convince myself it was nothing, maybe a dead branch falling. But the sound had weight. It hadn't been random. It was the kind of noise that carries intention. I held my breath and listened. Nothing. No insects, no birds, not even the water. The forest that had been so alive earlier was now completely, unnaturally still. My first thought was bear. I'd seen signs before, scat, clawed trunks, but always at a distance. Still, bears don't usually move quietly. And that sound, it hadn't been from an animal moving through brush. It was wood breaking under immense pressure. Minutes passed. I don't know how many. The silence stretched so long that my heartbeat felt deafening inside the tent. I started to relax, telling myself it was over, when I heard something else. A step, not the quick, light steps of a deer, not the cautious padding of a fox. This was deliberate, heavy, measured, thump, thump, thump. Each step pressed into the earth with an impossible rhythm, 2 beats, evenly spaced. Bipedal. I froze. My hand groped for the flashlight by my sleeping bag but stopped halfway. Turning it on would make me visible. I didn't want to be visible. The footsteps stopped. They were close now, right at the edge of the clearing, just beyond the tent wall. I could feel it. That pressure you get when someone's eyes are on you, even in the dark. The air seemed to tighten, every breath heavy and slow. Something brushed against the outer fabric of the tent. Just once, a whisper of movement. My throat closed. Logic warred with instinct. I told myself it could still be an animal, something curious drawn by the smell of food or smoke. But deep down, I knew it wasn't curiosity that stood out there. It was awareness. The sound came again, not footsteps this time, a low vibration, almost too deep to be a voice. It started in the ground and worked its way up through my chest, a humming, strange and hollow, like metal bending under strain. Then, slowly, it shifted. The hum rose into a pattern, notes forming a tune I almost recognized. A lullaby. For a moment I thought I was dreaming. The melody was soft, lilting, and horribly wrong. Each note just slightly off-pitch, like it had been learned and repeated by something that didn't understand music but was trying to imitate it. My pulse pounded in my ears. I wanted to unzip the tent, to look, to prove to myself that it was just wind or some trick of sound, but my body wouldn't move. Every instinct screamed that looking would make it real. The humming drifted closer. Now I could make out words, or what sounded like words, but they didn't fit any language I knew. Half-sung, half-muttered syllables strung together, wrapped in a faint metallic echo that made my teeth ache. My breath came shallow. I thought of my truck, 12 miles away, unreachable through miles of dark forest. There was no one to hear me if I screamed. The song ended as abruptly as it had begun. Silence fell, thicker than before. I waited for another sound, for footsteps, for anything, but there was only the faint hiss of my own breath inside the sleeping bag. Eventually, I whispered, "It's nothing. It has to be nothing." But the words didn't sound right in the air. They didn't sound true, because deep down, I already knew. Whatever had stood out there in the mist, whatever had learned that broken song, it hadn't been a man, and it hadn't been a bear. Chapter 4. When the forest held its breath. The forest was holding its breath. I stayed frozen in my sleeping bag long after that broken lullaby stopped, waiting for something. Footsteps, rustling, even the sound of retreat. but nothing came. Only silence, so thick it pressed against my eardrums. My mind kept reaching for explanations. Wind through hollow wood, a coyote call bouncing off the ridge. Anything that fit the rules of the world I knew. But deep down, I already understood. This was different. The sound hadn't travelled through the air like a voice should. It had vibrated through the ground, through me. Like the forest itself had been used as a speaker. I slowly sat up, careful not to make a sound. My breath fogged the cold air inside the tent. I glanced at my watch, 3:07 a.m. The hour when reason starts to slip. I thought about my options. I could grab the flashlight, look outside, confront whatever was out there. Or I could stay quiet, pretend I hadn't heard a thing, and hope it lost interest. I chose silence. Minutes bled together. My heartbeat became the only rhythm left in the world. Then, faintly, I heard something new, a single drop of water hitting the top of the tent, then another, then more. It had started to rain. The patter was a relief at first, masking the silence, giving me something normal to hold on to. But after a few minutes, the rain began to sound strange, uneven, like something brushing against the tent between drops. I inched closer to the fabric, listening. The brushing wasn't random. It was tracing, slow, deliberate lines across the nylon, like a fingertip dragging down the surface. I flinched away, my throat closing around a scream I didn't let out. My flashlight was still beside me, and before I could stop myself, I turned it on. The beam hit the side of the tent from inside, casting a pale glow through the green nylon. And that's when I saw it. A shadow, tall, wide, wrong. It leaned over the tent, its outline distorting with the curve of the fabric. I could see where its head should have been, conical and heavy, and where one hand rested against the side. The fingers were too long, 5, maybe 6, and they moved slowly, pressing into the fabric as if testing it. My breath hitched. The thing was inches away, separated from me by a thin sheet of nylon and air. Then, without warning, the hand withdrew. The shadow stepped back, fading into the mist. I snapped the light off and waited in total darkness. Seconds passed, then minutes. No sound. Not even the rain now, just the slow drip of water from the trees. I forced myself to unzip the small window flap, just an inch, creating a narrow slit to peer through. Outside, the clearing looked exactly as it had before, fog rolling low, the ashes of my fire still faintly glowing. But near the edge, by the creek, something caught my eye. Footprints, 2 of them, pressed deep into the mud. The shape was human, but the scale wasn't. Each print was longer than my forearm, the toes splayed wide like roots gripping the earth. I stared, my mind refusing to make sense of what I was seeing. Bears sometimes leave prints that look human, I knew that, but not like this. These were deliberate, each step perfectly placed, as if whoever or whatever had made them wanted me to find them. A drop of cold water slid down the back of my neck, snapping me out of the trance. I zipped the window shut and gripped my hatchet tight. The weight of it was pathetic comfort against the idea of what might be standing out there, somewhere beyond the fog, watching the tent where I hid. I told myself I'd wait for dawn, but dawn felt impossibly far away. Because the silence hadn't returned to normal, it wasn't empty anymore. It was listening. Chapter 5. The Voice Beyond the Firelight. I must have drifted in and out of half-sleep, trapped between exhaustion and panic. When I opened my eyes again, the tent was filled with a cold, grey light. Dawn. Somehow, I'd survived the night. I stepped outside cautiously, my boots sinking into the wet ground. The clearing was exactly as I'd left it, quiet, still, wrapped in mist. For a moment, I convinced myself the tracks I'd seen were tricks of shadow, illusions made by fear and fog. But when I walked toward the creek, I saw them again, clear as before. Two enormous footprints pressed into the mud, each filled now with a thin film of water from the night's rain. The air tasted metallic. Every breath felt like inhaling electricity. I knelt to touch one of the prints, my fingers trembling. The depth was shocking. Whatever had made them had to weigh several 100 pounds, maybe more. The heel impression was deeper than the toes, as if it had stood there, balanced, watching. When I looked up, I saw something else. The bark on a nearby cedar had been stripped in 3 clean vertical gouges, deep, fresh, about 10 feet off the ground. I stared at them for a long time, trying to calculate what kind of creature could reach that high. None of the math made sense. I forced myself back to the fire pit and rekindled the embers. The tiny flame felt absurdly fragile against the immensity of the woods. I sat close, warming my hands, trying to let the crackle of burning wood drown out the thoughts spiraling through my head. As the sun climbed, the forest came back to life. A few birds called. A squirrel darted through ferns. It was enough to fool me into thinking the night had been some shared dream between me and the trees. By afternoon, I almost believed it. I hiked a short loop, found some wild berries, filtered water, and even caught myself humming, anything to drown out memory. When dusk returned, I felt foolish for how shaken I'd been. I told myself, "You came here for solitude, stop inventing ghosts." But that night, the forest reminded me what I'd forgotten. It started around midnight. I was sitting near the fire, the glow throwing long, shifting shapes against the tent. The air had gone unnaturally still again. No wind, no movement. I added another log and leaned back, watching the sparks twist upward into the fog. Then I heard it, a sound rising from the darkness beyond the firelight. It wasn't the same broken humming from before. This was quieter, closer, almost conversational. A faint, lilting tune drifting between the trees. It took me a second to recognize it, and when I did, my blood went cold. It was the same lullaby. The notes were clearer now, sung softly in what sounded like a woman's voice, gentle, almost beautiful. But there was a distortion beneath it, a metallic echo that didn't belong to any throat. I froze, staring into the dark. The voice was moving, circling, sometimes close enough that I could hear breath between words, sometimes far enough to vanish completely before returning again from another direction. I whispered, "Who's there?" The lullaby stopped. For a heartbeat, everything was silent again. Then, from directly behind me, close enough to feel on my skin, came a whisper. Not a word, not quite, but a tone that mimicked speech. A laugh followed, high, breathy, broken, like a recording of laughter played through damaged tape. I spun around, flashlight in hand, beam cutting through smoke and fog. Nothing, just trees, endless and unmoving. But the echo of that laugh lingered in the air, as if the sound itself refused to die. My body moved before my mind caught up. I backed toward the tent, the flashlight shaking in my grip. I knew then that whatever this was, it wasn't an animal. It wasn't random. It knew me now. I crawled into the tent, zipped it shut, and clutched the hatchet to my chest. The lullaby didn't return, but sleep never came either, because once you've heard something impossible whisper from the dark, silence is no longer comfort. It's anticipation. Chapter 6. Proof in the earth and bark. By morning, I was no longer sure where the dream ended and memory began. The fire had gone cold sometime before dawn, leaving only a black crater of ash and the smell of smoke soaked into my clothes. I sat outside the tent, staring at the footprints near the creek. They hadn't faded in the night. If anything, the edges looked sharper, as though the earth had hardened around them. No rain had fallen. no wind. Just those two impossible impressions waiting for me. Part of me wanted to pack up and leave, to follow my GPS track back to the truck and drive until I saw neon lights again. But another part, curiosity or denial, I don't know, needed proof. I needed something to make this logical. So I spent the morning looking. I followed the prints along the creek, careful not to disturb them. They led away from the clearing and up a slight ridge, vanishing into a tangle of ferns. But as I scanned the ground, I found more signs. Small trees bent at strange angles, as if twisted by massive hands. The moss on a boulder was scraped clean in 3 perfect lines. Everywhere I looked, there were traces, too deliberate to be random, too large to be human. When I reached the ridgetop, the wind shifted, carrying with it a smell that froze me in place. Damp fur, wet earth, and something else, something faintly metallic, like rust and ozone. I turned in a slow circle, every muscle locked. The forest around me looked unchanged, but the feeling of being watched was unmistakable. I moved fast, nearly tripping as I slid down the slope toward camp. My lungs burned, my legs shaking. By the time I stumbled into the clearing again, the mist was lifting, revealing the sky, a flat, cold grey. That's when I saw the tree. One of the great cedars near my tent had deep gashes running down its trunk, 3 of them, perfectly parallel, clean through bark and sapwood. Each groove was wide enough to fit my hand inside. I stepped closer, examining the cuts. They weren't made with a blade. The wood wasn't sliced. It was torn. I reached up, trying to measure the height. The lowest mark started at least 8 feet above the ground. The highest was closer to 10. No human could have made them, not even with a ladder. My hands trembled as I took photos with my phone, though I already knew they wouldn't prove anything. Pictures wouldn't capture what it felt like to stand there, to smell the resin bleeding from the wounds, to see the perfect precision of the cuts, to know something had done this effortlessly. I backed away and sat by the cold fire pit, staring into the ashes. I told myself I'd leave that evening. I'd pack everything, hike straight to the truck, and forget this place existed. But something in the air changed again. The light dimmed, though the sun hadn't set. The forest went silent for the 3rd time. I turned toward the creek. The surface was smooth as glass. No ripples, no sound, even the wind had stopped. The silence wasn't natural, it was expectant, like the moment before someone speaks your name. I picked up the hatchet and held it tight, my pulse racing. Then, from the far side of the creek, I heard it. A single, slow breath. Inhale, exhale. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal. It was the sound of something vast and patient drawing air into lungs that didn't belong in this world. I whispered to myself, "This is real. You're not imagining it." The words didn't help. Saying it out loud only made it worse. Because admitting it was real meant there was no safe explanation left. And that's when I realized the forest wasn't just watching anymore, it was waiting. If this story's pulling you in, hit the like button. It helps more insomniacs find their next sleepless night. Chapter 7. The night the tent was torn. I spent the rest of that day in a state I can only describe as suspended thought. I went through the motions, boiling water, checking my pack, rehearsing the route back toward the truck, but every movement felt detached, like watching someone else's hands. The forest had gone quiet again, but not peaceful. Every so often I caught a flicker of movement between the trees, too fast to follow. Each time I told myself it was nothing. As daylight faded, the mist returned, thick enough to blur the tree line into shadows. I rebuilt the fire higher than before, feeding it until the clearing glowed with flickering orange light. I told myself it would keep animals away. That was a lie I needed to believe. I forced myself to eat, though my stomach rejected every bite. The taste of smoke clung to everything. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I tried the satellite GPS. No signal, not even static. The screen flickered once, then went black. I left it lying there beside me like a dead thing. Night fell completely. The mist glowed faintly in the firelight, curling and shifting like it had a pulse. I remember thinking how strange it was that the creek no longer sounded like running water. It sounded like breathing. I must have sat there for hours, watching the fire and listening to the rhythm of my own pulse. At some point, fatigue won. I crawled into the tent, zipped the flap, and curled around the hatchet. The sound of crackling logs followed me into sleep. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the sound of something enormous moving through the clearing. At first, it was just vibration, the faint, rhythmic tremor of weight pressing into soft ground. Then came the slow drag of something brushing against the tent wall. My eyes opened in total darkness. The fire outside had burned down to embers, casting faint orange shadows through the thin nylon. I could see the silhouette of my breath rising in the cold. The air inside the tent had changed, thicker, warmer, heavy with a smell that made my stomach turn. Wet fur, soil, and something sharp, like iron dust. Then came a sound so close it felt like it was happening inside my skull. A deep inhale, followed by a long exhale. I could feel it vibrate through the ground. Whatever was out there was right beside me. I wanted to scream, to run, to do anything, but I couldn't move. Every muscle locked tight. The thing exhaled again, and the smell hit harder, rancid and ancient. Then I heard a low sound, somewhere between a growl and a whisper. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It had weight, like words that didn't belong to any language I knew. Something brushed against the top of the tent, dragging slowly across it. I followed the motion with my eyes until it stopped directly above me. Then the entire structure shuddered. Poles snapped, fabric ripped, cold air rushed in, bringing the forest with it. I bolted upright, hatchet raised, staring into moonlight and smoke. The fire outside was still smouldering, painting everything in dull orange light. And then I saw it, just for a second. A silhouette towering over the torn edge of the tent, broad shoulders, arms too long, a head sloping forward, crowned with tangled hair or moss. Two faint amber lights stared down at me, eyes that didn't reflect light but made it. I couldn't breathe, I couldn't even blink. It stood there, silent, studying me. Then one arm moved, slowly, deliberately, lowering toward me as if curious. That broke me. I scrambled backward, falling through torn fabric, my hands scraping earth and ash. The hatchet slipped from my fingers. The creature made a sound, a low rumble that shook the air itself. It wasn't anger, it was something closer to amusement. I reached the fire pit, grabbed a burning branch, and swung it wildly. Sparks scattered, lighting up the clearing. For an instant, the thing was fully visible. 9 or 10 feet tall, its body draped in dark, coarse hair that seemed to blend with bark. Skin underneath, where visible, was greyish, thick. Its face, if that's what it was hidden by shadow, but the eyes glowed with intelligent focus. And then, just as fast, it stepped backward into the mist and vanished. I stayed frozen by the fire until dawn, clutching that burning stick long after it went cold. The forest had shown me its face, and now I knew it wasn't finished. Chapter 8, The Word. It spoke. Dawn found me still by the fire, my eyes swollen and raw. Every muscle ached from tension. I hadn't slept at all. The tent was half collapsed beside me, its torn fabric fluttering weakly in the cold breeze. I kept expecting to wake up, but the scratches on my hands and the ash in my lungs told me I already had. The forest looked different in daylight, quieter, emptied out, as if the thing that had been here had taken something with it when it left. The footprints were still there, deeper now, pressed into the soft ground like scars that refused to fade. I tried to eat, but couldn't. The moment I swallowed, my throat closed. I just sat there, staring at the tree line, waiting for movement. Nothing came. By late morning, I made myself move. I checked my phone again. Dead. The GPS still blank. I told myself I'd start walking after I packed, but every time I tried to take down the tent, my hands refused. Some part of me believed that leaving the clearing would mean stepping closer to whatever had watched me all night. So I stayed, built the fire higher, talked to myself just to hear a human voice. "You're fine," I kept saying. "It's over." But it wasn't. The light began to fade again, slow and colourless. The mist rolled back in as though the day had only been a pause. I added more wood, but the flames burned dull, strangled by moisture. The air grew heavy, thick with the same metallic tang I'd smelled before. That was when I heard the breathing again. Not from the distance this time, from the edge of the clearing. Slow, steady, deliberate. I stood, gripping the hatchet. The sound didn't move closer, but it didn't stop. It was waiting for something. "Go away!" I shouted, my voice cracking in the cold air. "Do you hear me? Leave me alone." The forest swallowed my words without echo. For a long time, there was nothing. Then, from the dark, came a noise that froze me in place. Laughter. It was quiet, distorted, like a child's giggle played through damaged speakers. The tone wasn't cruel, it was curious. I felt every hair on my body stand up. I turned slowly toward the sound. The mist there was moving against the wind. Shapes inside it shifted, tall, slow, wrong. I raised the flashlight, its beam slicing through fog. 2 amber points appeared, floating above the ground. Eyes. They blinked once. Then a sound crawled out of the dark, sliding over the fire's crackle and the wind's sigh. A voice. It wasn't human. It wasn't animal. It was both, and neither. The tone was high, feminine, layered with static and echo, like words coming through a broken radio. "Hello." Just one word. I stumbled backward, the hatchet slipping from my grip. My brain refused to process what I'd heard. The syllables had been shaped like speech, but stretched wrong, mimicked. It had learned that sound. From me. "Don't," I whispered, not even sure who I was talking to. The thing shifted closer. Its outline flickered in the mist. Massive shoulders, arms long enough to drag against the ground. The eyes never blinked again. They just watched. "Hello," it said once more, quieter this time, almost tender. I felt my mind fracture in 2 halves, one insisting this couldn't be real, the other already planning escape routes through the dark. The rational half lost. I grabbed my pack, forgetting half of what was in it, and ran. Behind me, the forest came alive, the cracking of trees, the thud of footsteps heavier than thunder. The fire exploded in sparks as something immense moved through it. That single word chased me into the dark, replaying in my head like a broken recording. "Hello," and I knew then, it hadn't just been watching me. It had been learning me. Chapter 9. Run until the world ends. The second I turned, I was running. There wasn't a thought in my head, only movement. My legs pumped, lungs burning, vision narrowing to a tunnel of trees and mist. Branches whipped across my face, slicing my skin. I didn't care. The sound behind me was all that mattered. Thump, thump, thump. It was moving through the woods with impossible rhythm, each step too heavy, too precise, not crashing through brush but flowing through it, controlled, confident. I knew, with a clarity that cut through the panic, that it could catch me whenever it wanted. The air was thick and wet, every breath tasted of metal and smoke. My boots slipped on moss, sending me sprawling down a small slope. I hit the ground hard, rolled, and scrambled up again, ignoring the flare of pain in my ankle. I didn't stop, couldn't. Somewhere behind me, a tree snapped. The sound was obscene, like bone breaking under immense pressure. Then another. The thing wasn't chasing, it was herding. I didn't think. I just turned where instinct told me to turn, left around a boulder, over a fallen log slick with rain, through a curtain of ferns that slapped cold against my face. The flashlight in my hand flickered with every step, strobing the forest into flashes of nightmare. And then, through the chaos, came that voice again. It was closer now, directly behind me. The sound warped by distance and echo, but too clear to mistake. I screamed without meaning to. The sound came out raw, tearing my throat. The flashlight slipped from my hand and vanished into the undergrowth. Darkness swallowed everything. I ran blind. My foot caught on a root and I went down hard. Pain exploded in my left leg, a sharp, electric burn that made me gasp. When I tried to stand, the ankle gave way. I fell again. Panic gave way to cold, animal focus. I crawled, hands in the mud, knees scraping stone. The smell of rot and moss filled my nose. I could hear it behind me now, breathing slow and deep, as though it wasn't even exerting itself. A tree loomed ahead, a massive cedar, its roots twisting like veins above the ground. I pulled myself behind it, pressing my body against the bark, forcing myself to be silent. My heart thundered so loud I was sure it could hear it. The footsteps stopped. The forest fell silent except for the hiss of wind through wet leaves. I waited, eyes wide, every nerve screaming. Then, just on the other side of the tree, something exhaled, long, deep, the sound of air moving through lungs that didn't belong to any natural shape. The voice came again, soft and broken, inches away. "Alex!" It had learned my name. I bit down on my fist to stop the sound that rose in my throat. My whole body shook. For a long time, there was nothing. Then a heavy thud as something massive moved away, its weight fading into distance. I didn't move. I waited until I could no longer hear it, until even the echoes of those steps had dissolved into rain. Only then did I drag myself forward, limping, half crawling, using branches for balance. Every sound made me flinch. Every shadow looked like eyes. Eventually the ground sloped down sharply. I saw nothing but void until my foot hit air and I tumbled forward, sliding down a muddy embankment. Rocks and roots tore at my hands. I hit bottom hard, landing in cold water. I gasped, disoriented. The creek. I'd crossed it without realizing. Above me, far on the ridge, I saw it, tall, motionless, watching. The faint glow of its eyes burned through the mist like embers in a storm. For one terrible moment, I thought it would jump. Instead, it tilted its head, slowly, curiously, and let out a sound that wasn't a word, wasn't a roar, but something between the two. A scream of metal and thunder echoing through the valley. The forest shuddered with it, and then it turned and disappeared into the fog. I didn't wait. I dragged myself downstream, limping, choking back sobs, following the water as it curved into blackness. That's how I survived the night, moving because stopping meant seeing those eyes again. Chapter 10. The Dawn That Lied. At some point, the forest changed colour. The The black of night gave way to dull grey, and I realised it was morning. I was still moving, half crawling through the creek bed, soaked to the bone. Every inch of me hurt, ankle throbbing, knees torn, palms bleeding, but I couldn't stop. When the first hint of sunlight touched the mist, I finally collapsed against a boulder. The world looked washed out, stripped of depth. The forest that had felt infinite last night now seemed smaller, flatter, like a painting fading at the edges. For a long time I didn't move. I just listened. Birdsong. At first I thought I imagined it, but no, there it was. A robin, clear and bright, calling from somewhere above. Then a second, then the soft chatter of insects waking up with the day. The world was coming back. I pressed my palms against the cold stone and laughed. Quiet, shaky, half hysterical. Maybe I'd lost my mind last night. Maybe it had all been a hallucination brought on by exhaustion and fear. People break out here, I told myself. Isolation does strange things to the brain. I limped along the creek until I found a patch of sunlight cutting through the trees. I knelt in it, letting the warmth hit my face. The air smelled fresh again. Pine, damp earth, no metal, no rot. The forest looked normal, ordinary, but as I followed the light, I noticed small things. The stillness beneath the surface, the way the mist refused to lift from the ground, clinging low like smoke that wouldn't dissipate. And then there were the trees. Dozens of them twisted at their bases as if something had pushed against them from the inside. The bark stripped in long spirals, sap still bleeding. Each wound was too clean, too recent. The feeling crept back, that quiet knowing that I wasn't alone. The birds stopped. The world paused. I limped faster, following the creek downhill, forcing my eyes away from the tree line. When I glanced back once, just once, I thought I saw movement, a shape between the trunks, tall and slow, walking parallel to me but not approaching, watching. I didn't stop to confirm it. By afternoon, the forest thinned enough for sunlight to break through completely. I found a narrow dirt track carved by old tires, maybe logging trucks from decades ago. It wasn't on any map I'd seen, but it meant people, civilization. I followed it, step by step, each one a war. My ankles screamed with every movement. The world shimmered at the edges. I was running on adrenaline and disbelief. Then I heard something that nearly dropped me to my knees. An engine. Faint at first, but growing, the rumble of a truck. I waved, shouted, stumbled into the middle of the road. When the old pickup appeared around the bend, I almost cried. It slowed to a stop, gravel crunching beneath its tires. The driver was a man in his 60s, grey beard, worn jacket, eyes like he'd seen every kind of storm. He rolled down the window and stared at me for a long moment before speaking. "You all right, son?" I opened my mouth to answer, but nothing came out. My throat felt scraped raw. He stepped out, helped me into the passenger seat without asking another question. As I sank into the seat, I looked back toward the trees. The mist was already closing over the road like a curtain. We drove in silence for a long time. When I finally spoke, it was automatic, rehearsed. "Got lost," I said. "Slipped near the creek. Twisted my ankle." The old man nodded slowly. "Happens out here." His tone was neutral, but his eyes flicked toward the tree line. Just once. And in that glance, I saw something that made my stomach twist. Recognition. He'd heard stories, maybe seen something himself. We didn't talk again until the road widened and sunlight filled the cab. The hum of the engine should have been comforting, but it wasn't. The deeper we drove into daylight, the less real it felt, like we'd left something behind that hadn't finished with me yet. I told myself I was safe. I told myself it was over. But even then, I could still hear it. That broken word, stretched thin and metallic, echoing faintly through the static of memory. Hello. Chapter 11. The city that never sleeps. The city didn't feel real anymore. After the old man dropped me near the highway, I hitched a ride south, then another, until neon signs started blotting out the stars. When I finally reached home, I expected relief. Safety. But the silence of my apartment was worse than the woods. I sold all my camping gear the next day. Tent, boots, stove, gone. I told myself it was about moving on, but really, I couldn't stand the smell of smoke or canvas anymore. It made my chest tighten, like the forest had followed me home. Nights were the hardest. I'd lie awake staring at the ceiling, hearing phantom sounds, the snap of wood, the whisper of wind against nylon, that impossible hum vibrating faintly in my chest. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the eyes. Amber, patient, alive in a way human eyes never are. The first week, I told myself I was traumatized. The mind fills in blanks when it's afraid, right? I read everything I could find: sleep deprivation, pareidolia, the way sound travels through valleys. There was a rational reason for all of it. There had to be. But explanations don't stop the dreams. I started seeing it in reflections, just for a second. In a window across the street, in the dark glass of a train door, in the chrome of a passing car, a tall shadow, shoulders too wide, head bowed, always facing me. Every time I blinked, it was gone, leaving behind a faint shimmer like heat rising from asphalt. The city's noise used to comfort me. Now it just reminded me of breathing. Engines idling at night, the rhythm of footsteps in hallways, the hum of power lines, it all built into a pattern, one I couldn't unhear, like the lullaby had buried itself under every sound. I started keeping the lights on, all of them, even when I slept, if you could call it that. The glow from the lamps turned my apartment into a pale imitation of daylight, but it didn't help. Darkness wasn't the problem anymore. Silence was. Sometimes, in that thin hour before dawn, I'd think I heard it again. The voice. Not loud, never loud, just a trace of static beneath the city's hum, a half-formed syllable leaking through the noise. Once, I heard it clearly. I'd been dozing at my desk, my head resting against folded arms. When I woke, the room was quiet, except for the low buzz of the refrigerator. Then, from somewhere behind me, came that sound I thought I'd left in the forest. "Alex!" I spun around, knocking over the chair. Nothing. Just shadows stretching along the wall, long and wrong in the pale light. I didn't sleep the rest of that night, or the one after. People started noticing. Co-workers, friends, they said I looked pale, distracted. I lied, said I was just burned out. The truth was harder to explain. How do you tell someone that a forest looked at you and decided to remember your name? One night, I walked for hours, letting the city swallow me. Lights, traffic, strangers' voices, it should have drowned everything out. But under the noise, I heard it again, faint as breath on glass. A low hum, rising and falling, almost melodic. The lullaby. I stopped walking. Cars moved around me, horns blaring. Nobody noticed me standing there, shaking in the middle of the crosswalk. When I got home, I locked every door and window, pulled the curtains tight, and sat in the dark. I listened for hours. Nothing came. The city kept breathing its mechanical rhythm, and I matched my own breathing to it, like maybe if I moved with the noise, it couldn't find me. I told myself that whatever it was, it couldn't exist here. It belonged to the forest, the deep old places where light dies before it touches the ground. But sometimes, when the night is very still, when the city forgets to make a sound, I swear I can feel it again. The same electric weight in the air, the same pressure behind my ears, the same silence, listening, waiting. Chapter 12. The last echo in the dark. It's been months now. People think I'm better. I work again, I answer messages, I even laugh when I need to. But I don't go anywhere quiet anymore. I can't. Silence feels like bait. There's always noise in my apartment. TV, fan, music playing low enough to keep the air moving. If the sound ever cuts out, even for a second, I feel it. The pressure, that weight that builds behind the walls, like the space itself is waiting to exhale. Sometimes, when I wake in the middle of the night, I catch myself listening, not for sirens or neighbors or wind, for breathing. I tell myself it's nothing. Pipes, the hum of the fridge, old buildings settling, but that lie doesn't work as well as it used to. I've tried therapy. They tell me it's trauma, that the mind holds on to fear in strange ways. That's comforting, in a clinical kind of way. It lets me believe this is all in my head. But then things happen. Small things. Last week, I came home to find mud across the floor near the balcony. 2 perfect prints leading from the glass door to the kitchen. Human-sized but wide, the toes splayed too far apart. I told myself it was a leak from the planter outside. I cleaned it up, didn't take pictures this time. Then, the night after, I woke to a soft sound coming from the hallway. A low hum, almost like someone singing under their breath. It stopped when I moved. When I checked, the hall was empty. The window at the far end was open just an inch, the curtain breathing in and out like lungs. I've learned to stop investigating. The forest taught me that curiosity is what it wants. That's how it finds its way in. So I pretend not to hear. I pretend not to notice when the lights flicker, or when the air turns heavy enough to make the apartment feel smaller. I keep moving, keep working, keep talking to people so I don't have to listen too closely. But sometimes I catch it watching, reflections again. Windows at night when the city is dark behind me. A shape that doesn't belong among buildings and glass. Shoulders too broad, head tilted just slightly as if still curious. I blink and it's gone. Always gone. But the air afterward feels electric, like a storm waiting just beyond sight. I tell myself it's memory, that nothing left the woods with me. But memory doesn't whisper. It happened again last night. I woke just before dawn, that strange hour when the sky is neither dark nor light. The city was quiet, almost completely. For the first time in months, I realized my apartment was utterly still. No music, no hum, no sound at all. And in that silence, I heard it. A single word, soft, metallic, stretching out from nowhere. Hello. I sat up slowly. The room was empty, washed in blue light from the window. But as I looked toward the glass, I saw it. 2 faint amber glows, reflected in the pane, hovering right behind me. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just stared until the light outside grew brighter, until dawn burned the reflection away. Now the sun is up. The city is loud again. The world feels normal. But I know better. It isn't gone. It never was. It's patient, older than words, and it knows my name. It waits in the spaces between sound, the cracks in static, the pauses in breath. I think sometimes about going back to the forest, about standing in that clearing again by the creek and letting it finish whatever it started. Maybe that would be peace. But I don't move, I just listen, always listening, because I know one night soon, when the city finally sleeps and the world forgets to make a sound, I'll hear it again. That same voice, that same word, right beside my ear. Hello. If this story followed you into the dark, share it with someone who'll never sleep the same again.